Muted.
Muted.
When will I learn? Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are pleased to have you with us this evening, and we are so sorry for the loss that brings you here. We warmly welcome you and hope that our time together brings you comfort. My name is Marcia Reynes, and I'm Program Manager of Bereavement Support at JCFS Chicago. I want to thank Cantor Shira Ben David from Temple Sholem for opening our program. We extend our heartfelt appreciation to Scott Bauer and the board of the Lori S. Bauer Foundation for Sudden Loss for their generous support of this program. The foundation was established by Lori's friends and family in her honor to give help, healing, and hope to children and families that have suffered a sudden loss or crisis. Thank you for helping us to support those who are grieving. We will now review our program. Rabbi Joe Ozorowski will begin the program with a Jewish reflection. We will then welcome Limor Gildenblatt to share reflections on her grief journey. Then Leah Shefsky will present thoughts on the grief process and coping with loss. We will then invite Cantor Shira Ben David to share some music. After this, Rabbi Joe will lead us in remembrance of our loved ones. At the conclusion of our formal program, we will invite you to join a smaller breakout room conversation with JCFS staff. This will give you a chance to share and be in community. The groups are optional. Feel free to leave after the formal program if you wish. And just a few more announcements before we begin. Please keep yourself on mute. We are recording our presenters and PowerPoint slides only. The identity of all participants is kept confidential. If you want to communicate with a JCFS staff person during the presentation, please send a message to me in chat. So tonight we will learn more about our grief. And as the writer Helen Keller reminds us, we bereaved are not alone. We belong to the largest company in all the world, the company of those who have known suffering. We are here for ourselves and we are here for one another. We hope that our time together will help you feel more supported. We begin our program with some words from Rabbi Dr. Joseph Ozorowski. Rabbi Joe, as he is affectionately known, is a board-certified chaplain and rabbinic counselor at JCFS Chicago, where he leads our Jewish community chaplaincy program.
Okay. Thank you very, very much, Marcia. I want to thank all of you for being here with us this evening. It's not easy. It shows a lot of courage for you to take an hour or so out of your evening to join with a group of strangers online. We don't know you. Well, actually, some of us may know some of you, but most of us don't know each other. But we're grateful to you for being here tonight. We want to also offer condolences on your losses. You've experienced loss in many different ways tonight. We hope to give you a few tools that might help you in this journey and in this process. And I'm going to start out by offering a thought from the Torah. The period that we're in right now is called the period of the counting of the Omer. What's the count? We know what the word counting means. What's an Omer? Omer is actually a biblical measurement of grain. On the second day of the holiday of Shavuot, a certain amount of the newly ripened grain was brought to the temple, and then there was a period of counting. I'll give you the source of it. It's actually in the Torah in Leviticus chapter, hang on, I have it right here, actually, chapter 23, verse 15. I'll read it in Hebrew and English, then I'll give you the interpretations. Uspartam lachem mimocharat haShabbat miyom haviachem et omer hatnufa sheva shabbatot tmimot tieno. And then you shall count 7 complete weeks of 7 days after the day following the beginning of Passover, when you brought the Omer as an offering, until the day after the 7th week, when there will be a total of 50 days, 7 times 7, and the day after is 50. On the 50th day, you may present new grain as a meal offering to God. And that, of course, is referring to the holiday of Shavuot, the festival of weeks. So the Omer period is a period of counting, 49 days, 7 weeks, 7 days that connect Passover the festival of the liberation of our people from slavery and Egypt, to Shavuot, which is the anniversary of the giving of the Torah. Think Mount Sinai, think the Ten Commandments, and there's a 7-week period in between. Now, you are probably thinking to yourselves, that's all very, very nice, Rabbi, but what does that have to do with why I'm here tonight? What does that have to do with loss, with mourning, with bereavement, with the things that we bring with us this evening? I'd like to give you 3 thoughts, 3 dimensions that this period, which we're actually in the final week of, the period actually ends next week, because Shavuot is actually next Tuesday night, but we're still in the counting period. So what does it have to do with bereavement? I'm going to give you 3 possible paths. One is the simple idea of counting itself. So we're counting. Observant Jews will count every night what that period of that day of the Omer happens to be. Jewish bereavement tradition is also a tradition of counting. Whether you observed it or not, maybe some of you did, there are number counts in terms of the framework for bereavement in Jewish tradition. There's a Shiva period. People think of Shiva as the meal after the funeral, or maybe a limited period where people come to comfort, but the word Shiva itself means 7. The traditional period is a week, actually, a week after the funeral. So we count 7 days. Then there's a 30-day period that includes the 7-day period. And then for parents, there's a 12-month period, which includes 11 months of saying Kaddish. So counting is all over the place when it comes to Jewish bereavement tradition. The second idea, and this is not in the Torah itself, but it's something that I actually discovered when I thought about it. There's a wonderful midrash, a rabbinic teaching, and it's not in the Torah, it's later rabbinic commentary, that notes that not everybody left Egypt. We think about how our ancestors, the Jewish people, the Israelites, they all left Egypt. You think of the scene in the Ten Commandments where they're all jumping around and running around and leaving Egypt. But according to the rabbis in the midrash, a large fraction, maybe even the majority of Jews never made it out of Egypt. They actually died in Egypt. It stands to reason, this is my own idea, but I think it's essentially correct. It stands to reason that this 49-day period, as joyous as it was to leave slavery, was also a period of grief. They were mourning the people they had to leave behind who did not make it out of Egypt. There was grieving, celebration, and grieving. And finally, there's one more piece of this equation that's not in the Torah. It came much, much later. It happened actually much, much later. During the period after the Second Temple was destroyed, some 1900 years ago, there's a great rabbi named Rabbi Akiva. If you know your list of rabbis, if David Letterman had a list of top 10 rabbis, Rabbi Akiva would be on it. And the reason was that he had 24,000 students, says the Talmud. Whether it's 24,000 exactly doesn't really matter. He had a lot of students, and they died during this period. Why they died? Again, shrouded in a bit of mystery, perhaps executed by the Romans, the Roman occupiers who were quite brutal at the time, perhaps from illness. Now, the Talmud suggests they didn't treat each other well enough. Many reasons, we don't really know exactly why. We also know that there was a period towards the end of the counting period where the death stopped. It stopped. In fact, that day was the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer. It was last week. And it's a minor celebration. If you are very intensely involved in the Jewish community, you may have noticed that there were certain celebrations last week on Lag BaOmer, bonfires and gatherings and things of that sort. So what do all these things have in common with each other? They have in common the idea that there's a count. The count ends. There is loss. The loss doesn't end. The loss doesn't go away. But the grieving abates. There is a goal at which we can get to where things abate and life goes on. The grief doesn't last forever. It lasts with us. The loss is always there, but we find our way through it. This was true of the initial count, that eventually the count leads to, from Passover, liberation of the body, from slavery, to Shavuot, the festival of the giving of the Torah, the birthday of the Torah, liberation of the soul. We find it's true in terms of the loss they experienced in Egypt and after Egypt, that eventually also led them to Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah. And Rabbi Akiva's students, eventually they were buried, and although things were difficult, they were somehow able to continue even integrating the loss into their lives. And this is actually the bottom line. What they all have in common is that the losses don't go away. They do get better. Things do get better for most people. What we're here tonight together to learn a little bit and to share a little bit is to learn some tools that will help us to learn from the stories of other people, to learn from experts in the field and the best practices and wisdom of what we know around us. My thought was to give everybody a Torah framework. So I offer my condolences to all of you on the loss you've experienced. I hope that what you learned tonight will help you as you continue your journey. And now, I would like to introduce Limor Gildenblatt, who's going to share her personal grief journey following the death of her father, Dan.
Thank you, Rabbi. March 8th, 2023 will go down in history as one of the worst days of my life. On this day, my father, one of my best friends, my non-complicated parent, and the most amazing grandfather to my sons, passed away from sepsis. My father, Dan Frankel, Zichrono Livricha, was healthy 1 week before he passed. Prior to his death, he had been in bed for a few days, communicating to my family that it was just a virus. We believed him. He was actually supposed to come to Chicago to help watch my kids while we attended a bat mitzvah the following weekend. I remember his text canceling the trip and saying, "Health first." Unfortunately, the day before he passed, my mother, a nurse, noticed when he finally got out of bed that his left arm was incredibly swollen. He had a surgery in that location in the previous October, and it appeared that there may have been a small abscess on his arm that got infected. It's hard to fully know what happened, and everything happened so fast. He was in so much pain the weekend before he passed that it seemed like he took pain meds from the surgery to mitigate his pain. And as a result, he was not totally with it to tell my mother that he should go to the hospital. For the smartest man I knew, who spent his career as a chemist and researcher, it was incredibly not normal for him to be this out of it and not able to think straight. Either way, my mother immediately took him to the hospital, and while what he needed was to go to surgery to clean out the infection, he was never stable enough to go in, as he went into septic shock, and then his organs began to fail him. My father, mother, and brother were all living in Colorado, but my sister lives in LA while I live in Chicago. As soon as I learned that my father was not only in ICU, but that he had experienced septic shock, I had a bad feeling that he wouldn't get out. I immediately booked flights for my sister and me to head to Denver and completely forgot that I had 3 young children and a life in Chicago. Nothing else mattered. Thankfully, I have a supportive husband who carried the weight here as I went through the days that were ahead of me. I remember sitting in the airport that Wednesday being jealous of other parents traveling with young kids, which usually feels like a slight cute nightmare when we do it with our own. But I would have done anything to struggle through an airport with a screaming child than wait alone to board a plane, awaiting my father's destiny. Unfortunately, by the time I arrived to the hospital, my father was gone. He had a 3rd heart attack at that point, and the nurse said he really fought hard but couldn't make it through. My immediate family of 5 shrunk to 4 with what felt like little to no notice. When I think about one of the hardest parts of losing my father, it's that I didn't get to say goodbye and that I didn't fully know all of his wishes, what he would have wanted to do or say had he known his time was almost up, where he wanted to be buried, Boulder or Israel. That was a debate. Even what his password on his iPhone was, so we could get a hold of his pictures and notify his close friends and family in Israel. We paid an unnecessary amount of money to have someone hack into his phone after getting locked out for hours at a time. I learned the hard way that my birthday was in fact not his password. I think we all dream of our parents living until 120 and dying a peaceful death in their sleep surrounded by family. At least that's what I had hoped for. My father's mother passed when she was 105. So to say that losing my father at age 76 was a shock would be an understatement. He was a healthy, active man who loved life. He played soccer well into his 60s and took long daily walks in Boulder. He published research articles in chemistry journals long after he was retired and had plans to write books in chemistry along with other projects. Other than the fact that I was a daddy's girl my whole life, our relationship became even more unique when he agreed to live with us for short periods of times in his 70s to help care for our babies. He was always down to help carry us between maternity and paternity leaves or to keep our kids out of daycare for just 1 more month while he cared for them. This was a man that worked way too many hours when I was younger and never changed his kids' diapers, but he certainly had to learn how to change mine. One thing that those ahead of me in their grief journeys always told me was to keep my father's stories alive. and to show videos and pictures so that my kids would never forget him. One example of how we've done that this past year is that we decided my father comes back as rainbows. My sister and I saw a rainbow in the car mirror the day after he passed and made the decision then and there. My sons, especially my middle, who is the more emotional one, always points out, look, Sabadani is here, or look, a rainbow, Saba is visiting us. Moments like these give me a little hope as I continue my journey, even though it pains me that he can't be with us physically. Before I conclude tonight, I want to share some positive moments I had during my first year plus of grieving my father. The first being continuing to prioritize with my relationship with my mother and siblings. Unfortunately, losing a significant member of our family was a sobering reminder that life is short and we don't know how much time we have left. So being together when we can is top priority for us. After my father passed, my siblings and I decided to road trip to Chicago so I could have his car here to help both with driving lots of kids around, but also to have a physical reminder of him that he enjoyed. We refer to it as Sabadani's car, and always will. My siblings and I did the same exact drive he would do to visit my family in Chicago. We stayed at the same hotel he used to stay at in Lincoln, Nebraska, and ate at the same Chinese buffet he always ate at and he raved about. While I couldn't sleep that night due to terrible heartburn from a Chinese buffet that I may not rave about, at least I was surrounded by my siblings who were living through this nightmare with me. Another positive outcome during grief was becoming closer to current friends who sadly went through or were actively going through a parent loss as well as hearing from camp friends from over 20 years ago who carried me through with their texts leading up to big milestones and holidays that they knew would sting a little more. A friend of mine, also a psychotherapist, unexpectedly lost her mother 2 months before my loss. We decided to co-run and participate in a parent loss grief support group with a few friends of ours in Chicago who had recently lost a parent. 5 or 6 of us, or sometimes even 3, would meet every week for 6 weeks to share our stories and hold one another through our losses. I also did my best to attend the monthly Anshe Emet grief groups, and while these groups were not specific to parent loss, I felt an immediate connection to each attendee because I could relate to the pain that is losing a loved one, and I found those groups to be incredibly supportive as well. Grief is a club that no one wants to join, but once you're in, you have an unspoken bond, and it was really important for me to lean into these friendships and to community in general. Speaking of community, I don't have enough words to express how held I felt through my Chicago community, particularly by our day school, Chicago Jewish Day School, and our synagogue, Anshe Emet. People showed up in our lives to help us figure out how we would want to sit Shiva in Chicago, how they could take our kids off our hands to give them some normalcy and us a break. And I'll never forget the 3-month-long meal train that CJDS set up for us, so we had one less thing to worry about during such a difficult time. While it was unreal approaching the first yard site of my father, I felt long and hard about how I wanted to remember him. I found meaning in both the yard site date, March 25th, as well as the date on the American calendar, March 8th. I decided that while it would be easier to crawl into a ball in my bed, maybe snuggle some kids and zone out to a movie, that I wanted to continue to lean into community. On March 8th, which fell on a Friday, I attended a Ramah Shabbat dinner held at Anshe Emet and made sure close friends would join me. It was really nice to be with fellow Jews, to be surrounded by my people, and to watch my kids enjoy the small things in life as they ran around like maniacs at shul and skipped dinner as they usually do at the events I pay to attend. On Saturday, March 9th, I went out with some close girlfriends to do a celebration of my father. We cheers to him and his life while enjoying desserts, which was one of his favorite pastimes. And on the actual yard site on March 25th, we hosted some of our best friends and ordered in from his favorite Chinese restaurant in Chicago to remember him. This will become one of our traditions. There's so much more to say, but I'll leave you with this. Grief sucks. It's the worst pain we could ever experience. Not a day will go by where I don't think of my father and feel deep sorrow for the fact that I lost him so young and so fast. But I will continue to live by a new outlook on life that is prioritizing the important things, my family, my friends, having experiences, and I will never stop talking about him and telling his story. Even though I'm anticipating more storms, I will always look for the rainbows. Thank you.
Is it me?
I was not unmuted. Limor, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. I know that Marcia has been just sharing with me about you in the group that we co-facilitate with Anshe Ahmed, and I know that you've been such a valued member of that group. And so beautiful to hear your story and memories of your father. Thank you for sharing him with us, and may his memory be for a blessing.
Thank you.
My name is Leah Shefsky, and I'm a grief specialist and chaplaincy coordinator here at JCFS. I'm honored to share some general reflections about grief and some strategies for coping with loss. Grief is a normal and natural reaction to loss. As Gerald May wrote, grief is not a problem to be solved, nor a difficulty to overcome. It is a sacred expression of love, a sacred sorrow. Some of the things that I'm gonna share tonight might work for you, some of it might not, and that's okay. These are just sort of some offerings from other folks who have experienced grief. So although we know that grief is universal, we also know that everyone's experience is different. And I often say there are as many ways to grieve as there are people grieving, and the people who we are grieving for. So again, these are just some offerings, take or leave what feels good, what feels like it fits. So grief is manifested in a few ways. We have emotionally, we may experience a range of feelings, including sadness and yearning, fear, anxiety, anger, regret, and guilt, loneliness, shock, and numbness. This might sort of feel like the most obvious one. I think it's the one that we talk about the most in our society. But we know too that grief can be felt physically. We may lack energy, feel a hollowness in our stomach and heart, and a tightness in our chest. We know that cognitively we may be confused or in a fog, experience a sense of disbelief, or a sense of our deceased loved one's presence. We talk a lot, particularly in the early days, about the brain fog that can come with grief, and heard many times from folks who just feel like their brain's not working the way it normally is. And behaviorally, we may experience crying, sleep and appetite irregularities, withdrawing socially from others, having dreams of our deceased loved ones. And spiritually, we may be angry with God and question our faith. And some of these may feel familiar to you. You may have experienced them or be experiencing them right now. Others you might not. And there are, of course, maybe other ways that grief has impacted you outside of these, but I know these have been helpful to sort of think about the different kinds of ways that grief can show up. Grief is often compared to a journey with ups and downs and twists and turns. We know that grief is not linear. That's a process. It takes time, and there is no set timeline. Grief is something that we need to go through. The path to healing and growth asks us to acknowledge our painful, sometimes confusing and contradictory emotions, and express them rather than avoiding them. Some of you may be familiar with the children's book, We're Going on a Bear Hunt by Michael Rosen, that conveys this so well. We can't go over it. We can't go under it. We've got to go through it. And as we know, we don't move on from grief. We move forward with it, often one step at a time. And over time, we are better able to integrate our loss into our life and carry our grief. It doesn't go away. And we don't move past it. It's just sort of figuring out how to incorporate that grief into the other facets of our life. And sometimes people feel frustrated when they think they're doing better, and then they may have a day when they can't stop crying, and this is all part of the process. It doesn't mean that they aren't moving forward. And along that winding path are what mourners often describe as waves of grief. These waves vary in intensity and frequency. Early on, when grief is very raw, the waves are high and intense and can feel overwhelming and overpowering. And slowly over time, the waves diminish in intensity and frequency. They get smaller and there can be more space between them. The waves can be triggered by something expected, a birthday, an anniversary, a holiday, or a yard site. but more often than not are also triggered by something unexpected. Hearing a song, smelling a certain food, being in a certain location, often grocery shopping, we hear time and time again, is very often a trigger for a wave of grief. And so although these waves can be unpredictable, the challenge is to recognize that you are experiencing a wave of grief. And remember that no matter how much it hurts in the moment, the pain will eventually lessen. In previous programs, we included the following tips as getting through the holidays. But of course, in the first years of grief and often after, there are always firsts. There are always times that you may be navigating something new, whether it's a large family celebration or just a hard day. And so we know that these tips are not actually seasonal. And I think as summer is blooming outside, it's a gorgeous day. It looks like the weather will continue to be wonderful. That can often be the hardest for our grief. I think that in the winter, sometimes if it's dark, if it's cold out, the grief might sort of feel like it fits, right? Everyone's sort of holed up inside. But in summer, people are outside, they're celebrating, there's joy, there's light. And so it can be particularly challenging to kind of reconcile what's going on inside of us with what's going on outside, whether that's a 4th of July barbecue or whatever that is. So just want to offer some strategies that may be helpful in coping with our grief as we find balance between what we may be experiencing internally and what's happening around us. So first of all, take care of yourself, be kind and gentle and compassionate, take care of your physical health, and what you need can change by the day or by the and I think that that's something when to go and find the support of her and to just be aware of that. I just got a notice that my internet connection is unstable. If folks are having a hard time hearing me, if you could some you can cry with, some you can take a walk with, some you can share a small meal with. All right, I am hearing that I am frozen. Give me one moment. I am going to try something else. I apologize. Thank you all for your patience. All right. All right. I'm not quite sure what's happening. I'm going to keep going. I think I was talking about report and sort of knowing that every friend or every need. So, you know, again, school really showed up in that way, more for you and your family. And then also a pet will remind you that you are needed and offer unconditional love and companionship. Sorry, I'm getting some messages about whether I am cutting in or out, so I'm not sure. I'm just going to keep going. If you'd like to move on, feel free to do that. Sorry. And then feel free to ask for help. Others often want to help, but may not know what to offer. Grief takes a lot of energy. It can be exhausting. Allow yourself to connect with others who can support you and also give yourself alone time to recharge and readjust. And then finding ways to express your grief, speak with a trusted friend or family member, participate in a support group or individual counseling, meet with a chaplain. Consider writing your thoughts and feelings in a journal or expressing yourself in art, or music, or through movement. Practice some mindfulness meditation, whatever works for you. These are just some examples from other folks. And then, of course, sharing memories of your loved one, finding a meaningful way to preserve or honor your loved one's memory can provide comfort and healing. Sharing their stories, sharing their photographs, keeping their memory alive. And then plan ahead for special occasions or important dates. You can prepare yourself with coping tools for what you anticipate might be hard, holiday gatherings, special occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, yard sites. Having an exit strategy is key. Think about what you can handle this year and eliminate the pressures about what you should or need to do. I like to remind folks to remove the word should from their vocabulary if they can. There's a lot of expectations that we set for ourselves around grief, around those dates. And so feel free to create new rituals, new traditions. It's okay to do things differently, especially while you are grieving. What is important is that you're doing what is right for you. And then allow for joyful moments. While we're grieving the death of a loved one, we are also trying to adjust to life after loss. There are still people in your life and things that are special and meaningful, even if it seems hard to focus on this at this difficult time. There may be a lot of tears right now, and there can also be laughter and moments of joy too. You know, those things can often go hand in hand. Allow yourself to do things that make you feel good. This may include reaching out to others or volunteering for a cause that is meaningful for you or your loved one. Serving others can be very healing. Then lastly, using resources that are available. We know for additional support, feel free to reach out to JCFS Chicago for counseling, chaplaincy support, or support group. Being with others who get it can help you feel you are not alone. The care you invest in yourself right now will help you to carry your loved one's memory and legacy forward in meaningful ways. Please know that we are here to walk you on this journey. You are not alone. Life may never be the same. Life will never be the same, but we can still learn to live our lives in a full and meaningful way, even after we experience deep loss. Thank you. And of course, we know that sometimes when there are no words in grief, music can be a comfort. You've listened to me talk long enough, and I think that music often can share much more than what we're able to with words. So I'd like to introduce Cancer Shero Ben David to share some music with us. She's the Cancer at Temple Shalom in Lakeview. And it has been a joy to get to know her through the process of having her joining us this evening. So I will turn it over to you, Cantor Ben David.
Thanks, Maya. Well, I am going to sing, but I am going to share something with you too. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes?
Yep.
Okay. So my father, Cantor Carey Ben David, was the cantor at Scarsdale Synagogue for 30 some odd years. And so growing up, he was obsessed about speaking to me about grief and about dispelling some of the morbidity and difficulties of loss. I used to follow him for some of his funerals and unveilings he had to do and hang out at the cemetery with him until he was done. And he would always say to me, "Sweetie, I've sung every song I want to sing. Just know that. And just know that no matter what happens, I'm always going to be talking to you. I've already told you everything that you need to know from me. Just listen for me." And so I wanted to share this little text from you because back in 2015, it was a special day that my dad called me and said, Do you know whose funeral I did today? I did the funeral of the president that hired me as the cantor 30 years ago, he said. And I got to see so many congregants. It was amazing, he said. And I said, Dad, that's awesome. And he said, well, tonight I'm doing the Shiva Minyan. I'll talk to you later. And he went to the Shiva Minyan in Scarsdale, and he was walking around the room, and he remembered everyone's names, and he was asking how kids were. And then he got in his car in the driveway of their home and had a very, God, hopefully a very quick heart attack and died right there in their driveway. And it wasn't until later that people said, why is the cantor still sitting there? And since then, that sudden loss, I am still in conversation with my father because I know what he would say. I know what he would want to say to me, so I can still hear him. And so I wanted to share this text with you that we use for our Shabbat Nachamu, our Sabbath of comfort, as we come out of Tisha B'Av at the end of the summer. And I love this because it's comfort, comfort me. But what I love the most about this text from Isaiah is the speak consolingly to Jerusalem. That I love, I've also seen translations of this that have said, speak gently to Jerusalem, or speak tenderly to Jerusalem. And that's how I think, that's what I need. I need not just to speak to my Father from wherever he is around me, to speak tenderly, but I need to speak tenderly to myself. Just like so many have said before, be gentle with yourself and let this relationship take shape. And so we say these words, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem. Dabru alev Yerushalayim, v'kiru eleha nachamu. Dabru alev Yerushalayim, v'kiru eleha. Nachamu, nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem. Dabru alev Yerushalayim, v'kiru eleha. Dabru alev Yerushalayim, v'kiru eleha. Nachamu, nachamu, Ami, Yomar Elohechem.
Thank you so very, very much, Cantor Ben David. That was beautiful and touching. And we also thank you for sharing your story with us about your father, Olav Shalom. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And we really are grateful to you for sharing that. We got to know him a little bit as well. We're going to take a few moments here of reflection and remembrance in silence, maybe with a little bit of musical background helping us out here. This is the moment where all of us get to recall and remember the ones that we've lost, and you can do this in any way you choose. If you have a picture, you might want to look at the picture. If you have a candle, you could light the candle. You can close your eyes, you can meditate, you can just move to the music, or you can actually do something that actually came up in the chat while we were listening to Leah, a really interesting conversation in the chat, which I wrote about and a number of you responded to, and Cantor Ben David actually spoke about, and that's talking to your loved one. It's not something you have to do, but it's something that you could do in addition to all the tools that Leah had suggested. It's another tool to put in our bereaving toolbox, talking to our loved one, because what we do know is that the relationship changes on the death of a loved one. It doesn't go away. There's still a relationship. It's still there. So if you'd like to talk, just mute yourself if you're not already muted and say whatever you'd like to say to your loved one, or think about them, picture them in your mind, look at their pictures, whatever you'd like to do. Let's take a moment of silent reflection and remembrance. Thank you so very much for that beautiful background music. We're going to close the formal part of our evening with a poem by Rabbi Karen Kedar. Some of you may actually know or have known Rabbi Kedar. She is the Rabbi Emeritus of Congregation BJBE, which used to be in Glenview, and now it's in Deerfield on the border of Northbrook. It's called The Valley. And I'm gonna read it here. The valley of the shadow of death is a tender place. It is a place of questions and things unsaid, and grace and love and depth and sadness. My heart is open. My breath is gentle. I am tired and sleepless. So I sit a while by the still waters, and you are with me. God is with me. I shall not fear. And with that beautiful thought in mind, we're going to end the formal part of our evening. There's an informal part that I'll note in just a moment. First of all, thank you for joining us tonight. We offer our condolences to you. And we want to again thank those of you who participated in the evening, Cantor Ben David, to Limor Gillenblatt for sharing her story about her loss, her father, to Marcia Reynes, to Leah Shevsky and Eliza Becker, and of course to the Laura S. Bauer Foundation for Sudden Loss for supporting this evening's program. You will be getting a follow-up email, and it will include more information about our various support groups, references, and also an evaluation of this program. We're going to put that in the chat actually momentarily. Just to let you know, your feedback on the evaluation is really important to the work that we do. It lets us know, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing or not? Are we missing something? And we all need to hear about that. So we ask that you take a few minutes now while we're closing actually for you to complete it. It should be in the chat. Now let me just, I'll double check it in a moment, but it will be going there. We want to close our formal program. First of all, by letting you know that we will be having support groups, breakout groups after we're formally done. That's what I mentioned about the formal part of the program. But if some of you would like to share a little bit more deeply, share your own stories, we'll give you the opportunity with breakout groups after we're officially done here. If you choose not to, that's perfectly okay. If you're done, you got what you needed tonight, you have other things to do tonight, then we wish you a good evening. But if you'd like to stay and join with us, we will be around to help facilitate those breakout groups. We close our formal program with our blessings to you as you move along your grief journey. We offer our condolences to you on your losses. We encourage you to continue to find meaningful ways to honor the memory of your loved one at the same time while you continue to honor your own well-being. And please remember that the JCFF staff are always here for you. We have groups, we have chaplaincy support, we have one-on-one counseling, we have all sorts of things available to you to support you. And we thank you for being here tonight. We wish you a meaningful counting, as we spoke of earlier. And since next week is the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, it's not too early to wish you a Chag Sameach, which literally means a joyous holiday. It might not be that joyous for you. You might not even be observing it or even know about it. It's not one of the more well-known holidays, even though it's a biblical one. But what we will ask you and offer to you is our blessing that you may find joy in some version of the holiday. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Have a good evening.
Yashar Koach. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, so now we're